everyone, to today's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm Sally Ganga from College Coach. Seniors, have you submitted your early applications? And maybe you're now considering adding or subtracting colleges from your list. Listen in on segment 2 for our office hours. I'll be talking with my colleague, Karen Spencer. She's a veteran here at College Coach, formerly worked at Georgetown and Franklin and Marshall, and has been helping students figure these things out for quite a while now. For my third segment, I'll be interviewing Lauren Randall, another colleague, also formerly of Georgetown. I promise you this is just a coincidence. Wasn't intentional, but about her experience with internships. She did a lot of internships in the political sphere and then ended up working in education. So I think this is going to be a really interesting peek into the value of internships and how they can still be valuable even when they're not directly related to what you end up doing. But first, I'll be talking with Beth Feinberg Keenan, one of our college finance experts, about how having multiple children affects your eligibility for financial aid. Welcome, Beth.
Thanks, Sally, for having me today.
I'm so glad you're on to talk about this because honestly, I've heard an explanation from the finance team and I'm still a little confused by it. So I think it'll be good. I imagine if I'm confused, other people are pretty confused. So let's start off. Maybe you can start off by telling me a little bit about how the financial aid formula treats having more than one child in college.
So let's start off by how the financial aid formula looks at that today. So currently, if you have more than one child in college, whether you have multiple, so twins or triplets, or you just happen to have kids spaced out that they are going to have some type of overlap, the years where you have more than one child in college at the same time, your annual family contribution is divided between those children. So I think, Sally, a really good example is let's say that you file for financial aid and child one is off to college, and based on the information that you provide on the applications, it comes back and says, hey, Sally, you could afford $40,000 for 1 year of college. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, well, a year or two later, you have your second child going to college and you'll be filing for financial aid for both of the children. So what happens currently today is the family contribution split. So for your child that's currently in college, their family contribution or your expected contribution for them is going to drop to about $20,000. And for the second child, it will be $20,000. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's the best really way to explain it is it's going to be divided between how many children you have attending at the same time.
Right.
That's today.
So kind of it would work like if the expected family contribution is $40,000, supposedly assuming a school doesn't gap, which is a whole nother thing, you're only paying $40,000 for one child, and then when it's two children, it's still $40,000.
Correct, annually. Correct.
Right,
so
annually.
Right, exactly. Yes. That's really important to understand that that's how it works today.
Mm-hmm. Today, okay. So how does it work? How is it going to work? Or I heard that there are some changes happening 24-25. So this is pretty relevant with some parents who have younger students coming down the pipeline.
It is, and it's really relevant for families as they're planning for really high school juniors and seniors too, because some of the big changes that are happening and is really under this umbrella called FAFSA simplification. Mm-hmm. The FAFSA form that families are filing right now is being brought from over 100 questions down to under 40 questions. The expected family contribution that everybody seems to know, like what's this EFC, is being changed to the student aid index. There's going to be some changes to the financial aid formula, a larger income protection allowance for families, so more household income is going to be sheltered for families. Some types of untaxed income that families are currently reporting on the financial aid application are not going to be reported anymore because the only types of untaxed income are going to be those that they can actually obtain from the federal taxes. So you don't get child support from federal taxes. You don't get your contributions to your 401ks from your federal taxes. So those are no longer going to be reported on the financial aid application. But Sally, this is really the big one. The big one is its treatment of having more than one child in college. Mm-hmm. That's going away. So while those questions are still going to be on the financial aid application, the FAFSA is still going to ask how many in the household, how many in college. It's not going to split it anymore. Mm-hmm. So that's why, in your previous question, I said, like, hey, you got to know that that's today. Because in 24, 25, when you're going to have overlap, you're going to have more than one child in college. If your annual family contribution or student aid index at that time is $40,000, it's going to be $40,000 for each of your children.
Right.
And the other thing that I want to point out too, that I hope some of our listeners maybe follow our blog post too, is we actually posted a blog back, I think it was December 20th, on these changes, FAFSA simplification. So I would encourage like our listeners to go check out our blog post and to really look at that one from December 20th and FAFSA simplification, because it breaks down a lot of these changes.
Yeah, and I imagine, especially given how it's called FAFSA simplification, I mean, boy, that sounds like a great thing, but then you got two kids. And I mean, I'm just thinking about my mother, like she had overlap with me and my brother, and then she had overlap with me and my younger sister. And so having to, like come up with all that extra money. I mean, it seems like the only option is for a lot of families is going to be loans then, right? That's going to be the expectation. I mean, what's kind of the concept behind it?
So, I mean, that's a great question. And as I say, I have my head spinning. I mean, Sally, I'm 13 months younger than my sister. So we had overlap, and I've been baking on this for years. I have twins.
Right,
I've
right.
been baking on this for years of having overlap between my girls. I don't know what the answer is. I guess if there's larger shortfalls, yes, it's going to be loans. It might also be decisions on where students can go to college, that, maybe they can't afford certain schools that they could have in the past. We don't know what schools are going to be doing either. So it's very important to ask colleges questions. Earlier you mentioned like, hey, this is really for younger kids, but no, families who have juniors and seniors right now, if you're making decisions in where your student can go to college, and that you're going to have, maybe you have overlap now and they're going to benefit from having a sibling in college, or maybe you're thinking like, hey, in the future we're going to have a sibling in college, you need to ask those questions. You need to ask the financial aid office of like, do you have a game plan? And if they don't have a game plan, then hey, you know what? Plan for the worst. And think about it. Can you afford? Can you afford that institution? Can you afford that institution based on what you're paying currently today? For the 4 years, or if you have a really good financial aid package because you have a sibling, they have a sibling in college. What happens if they lose it? Are you going to be able to? Are you going to be able to afford that additional shortfall that you're going to have to come up with?
Right. So this can be pretty complicated for families.
This can, and that's why it's so important that we're talking about this today, because I don't think that there's enough information out there about what's happening. And I don't necessarily know if families are thinking about this. And I know that in my phone calls with families, if this is something that I bring up, especially if there is going to be overlap, I want them to be asking these questions. And this is something that I'm mentioning if families have juniors, if families have seniors in high school, because I don't want them to plan for best case scenario. I want them to plan for worst case scenario. And I want them to think about like, what does this investment mean to my family? And how might this impact my ability to pay for other children if this is the first one going to college, or maybe the second one going to college?
Yeah, so I think families might be concerned. I mean, basically, if they have more than one in college, when this change happens, they're concerned that they're going to be losing aid, right?
They are. And they could be asking if colleges are grandfathering in students. So if a student has a sibling in college, and they are going to have a sibling in college in 24, 25, are they grandfathered in? And maybe the college is going to be making these changes with their own institutional financial assistance a little bit later on, and really impacting, those new applicants coming in 24, 25. But colleges haven't really been sharing like what they're going to be doing. All of us on the finance team, that's something that we all have our ears, out there, like what are colleges going to be doing? What are we hearing? And we haven't been hearing a whole heck of a lot right now.
They're probably still trying to figure it out, like they're like, what are we going to do about this? Because I mean, there are schools, you kind of referenced this before, there are schools just because we know what the federal government is doing, we don't know what the colleges are going to do. And there's also schools that require the College Scholarship Service profile, the CSS profile. So that is another layer of complexity. Are they still going to consider the overlap?
Again, Sally, an unknown, an unknown. There's so many unknowns in this area that we don't know. We don't know if the College Board is going to still split, not equally, because the College Board currently doesn't split it equally, but are they still going to split that family contribution between multiple children?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they going to follow suit of the federal government? And with the FAFSA simplification, we also feel that we think that more colleges might be looking to bring on the CSS profile,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe their own institutional application to use to award specifically their own institutional dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know like families like the Pell Grant and state aid, work study, like all of those things are going to use the federal, like the colleges are going to use the federal formula for that.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like their institutional need-based dollars, they really can do whatever they want. It's their institutional money. But if colleges are turning to look at having either their own application or the CSS profile, this FAFSA simplification might not be simple for many families,
Mm-hmm.
because the profile is a lot more questions, a lot more in depth, and families already say like the FAFSAs, takes a long time and can be difficult, to understand. I don't know what that's going to mean for families, who have to now, say, hey, sure, the FAFSA is super simple, but now I have to like worry about the CSS profile if colleges are, asking me to complete that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, I don't know, I'm pretty sympathetic to families. I mean, if you have a single child or if your children are 10 years apart, this is going to be great for you, right? But like, if it's not, I think most people space their kids by a couple years, so this is going to impact, I would imagine, most people who have multiple children.
It really is. I mean, some of the changes that is happening with FAFSA simplification, we've run some calculations, and families who have single, I was going to say one children, singletons,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I mean, they might see a little bit of a break because not looking at untaxed income, looking at an increased income protection allowance, they might actually have a little bit of a break with the expected family contribution and what they're expected to pay for college.
Mm-hmm.
But those families who have more than one child in college, whether they're expected to pay $40,000 a year, or they're expected to pay $36,000 a year because maybe they're getting a little bit of a break by two.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that I don't have all of a sudden like, an extra like bank account, sitting there saying I have so much more money because I have, two in college at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I think about this and, I'm happy because my girls are a little bit younger and, they're only in first grade. So we have some time to kind of see like how this is going to play out and what colleges are going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that kind of just sticks in like my gut of like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to do this? We're planning for them, but were we planning to have twice as much money? Not
right,
necessarily.
Exactly. Can't you just plan for that? I mean, like just plan for it.
Let me just pay $80,000 a year, of course.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so a lot to think about, but I'm sure you'll come back on as soon as you guys know anything, right? So, and write
Definitely.
a blog post. I think your point was really good. Like, I do want to recommend that everybody go to the blog post because I think sometimes it's easier. Like, it's fun to listen to our podcast. You can take a walk and listen to it, but this is pretty complex. So go to the blog post is what I would say too. When was that again? Like, what should they look for, Beth?
So is FAFSA simplification, and the post was written, I think, December. I know it was written December. I can't remember if it was like December 20th.
Yeah, but if they do a search for FAFSA simplification, FAFSA simplification, I'm sure they'll be able to find it. That search engine works pretty well. So, all right, great. Well, thanks so much, Beth. I don't know if you have any last things or did we kind of cover it?
Yeah, we pretty much covered it, but the only thing that I want to stress for families is just to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
As you're trying to make decisions, don't forget to ask those questions because I want you to be thinking about this in the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to make sure that you have answers that you're comfortable with as you make those deposits and you're committing for your juniors and seniors as they get admitted to colleges.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. I completely agree. And so many people don't. I was recently helping out a friend of mine who is a university professor, and he did not ask all the questions he needed about finances. I was like, how did you not ask this? You know, like you are as educated as we get. You have a PhD, you work at a university, and you still didn't ask. You know, it was just so yeah, people need to not be shy and not make assumptions. And so all right. All right. Listen, Beth, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me today, Sally.
Okay. All right. And we're going to take a short break, but when we return, I'll be talking with Karen Spencer about how seniors should look at their regular decision list of colleges.